I hate to say it, but pretty much every time I play Dungeons and Dragons as a player, I'm kind of disappointed in how the Dungeon Master runs things, and for that reason, I prefer to be the Dungeon Master myself. There comes a certain point after I graduated from middle school where I wanted a higher level of the game. You know, I wanted to play it not on easy mode. And I started exploring all the different ways that you could go into the game and make something more out of it, make it what it could be, you know? And I want to share with you some of those tips today. First tip is read your players and play to their favorite play styles. This one is in the Dungeon Master's Guide, and it's pretty important. Every player plays the game for a different reason, because Dungeons and Dragons has maybe 10 different aspects of it that are extremely compelling to different individuals. As the Dungeon Master, it's your responsibility to make sure they're enjoying themselves. Big burden, but I think it's one that every Dungeon Master should take on. I have a player named Nick who, as soon as we started playing the campaign, he began reading all the different players' guides and complete adventurer, complete warrior, essentially to deck out his character, and he memorized basically every feat, every skill tree out there. And you know what? All the power to him. That's really cool. I don't want to hold anything back from him if that's how he wants to play the game. So for him, I like to make sure that there's some really interesting combat that makes use of his powers and also challenges him in situations he's not used to. Then I have another player named Logan, and he enjoys combat, but he primarily is interested in role-playing. He likes getting into character and going into dialogues with individual NPCs that come into the world, and then more power to him. I want him to enjoy that. And then I have a player named Shane who loves the lore. He enjoys exploring and seeing how far down the world goes before he reaches the bottom. And I like to make sure he never finds that bottom. That's how big a world should be, in my opinion. Anyways, that's 3 examples, and there are hybrids and other types as well. But basically, it's my responsibility to make sure that there's a good variety of everything in there for everybody. There should be a little bit of role playing at least if we're doing a big combat that night. And if we're doing all role playing one night, maybe there should be some mini encounters that don't necessarily take up any more than 10 minutes. Okay, tip number 2 is to teach your players how to become better at the game. What I mean by this is raising the stakes so that they basically have to raise their ability to play the game in order to survive your adventures. For example, I have a player named Justin who's playing a fighter, and he's pretty new at Dungeons and Dragons, so we set him up as a fighter, which is a good, easy role for him to play, which still has a lot of power over what happens in the game. I've been teaching him that if he doesn't protect his allies are going to get pummeled. He's playing the game at a higher level. Instead of just walking up to things and whacking them, he's deciding, where do I position myself? Who do I taunt? Would it be better to grapple or to bull rush? And the thing is, your players are never going to try to think that hard about an encounter unless they think it's necessary. If I just throw mundane encounters at the party over and over again, they're going to get bored and they're going to win every time pretty easily. I was playing with someone recently who was playing a rogue, and we saw a group of bandits over by a campfire, and I said, all right, let's figure out a plan for what we're going to do. And then before I was done with my sentence, he had already rolled a stealth roll and walked within 15 feet of all the enemies. They noticed him, combat started, and he went down to 3 hit points immediately. This is kind of what I mean. He knows how to play a rogue, meaning he knows that he's a stealthy player, he should use stealth checks on a very basic level. But there's a higher level of gameplay here, which makes the game, in my opinion, a lot more fun. It's seeing an encounter that you know you're going to die if you don't actually plan out your moves and play with your brain. For that reason, you want to basically force your players to play at a higher level, and they're going to enjoy it more that way too. Tip number 3, you want to be the referee. You don't want to be their buddy, and you don't want to be their enemy. I've seen dungeon masters who want to please everybody, and they don't necessarily have any edge to their adventure. When I play with a dungeon master who's my buddy, I know I'm not going to die, unless I do something really ridiculous, in which case they're probably going to give me chance after chance to redeem myself and not die. And I'm going to get treasure for doing barely anything, and honestly, I'm just going to get bored. A buddy DM is good if you're a party of brand new players who've never played before. That's fine and well, but if you're actually going to play over a long period of time, the buddy act gets boring really quickly. At the same time, you don't want to be their enemy. You don't want to be that DM who's basically cackling every time he rolls the dice, hoping to kill a player. At that point, you cross into a territory of, do I trust the DM? Are they going to make unfair decisions that will get me killed, even if I think I played the game safely, or I made a good move but I died anyway? For this reason, I like to be the referee. What that means is I have what's laid out in front of me. It's absolute. If my monster can roll 3d8 plus 10 damage and that kills a player outright, then I know it was largely due to chance and also largely due to the fact that the player got hit by the monster and the monster was powerful and killed them. If you have a hard encounter that might kill the players, you got to play it out. It's no fun for the players to go in and basically be babysat, where if they lose the encounter, you're just going to pat them on the back and make all the dice rolls lower behind the screen so that they win in the end. That's what you do to 3-year-olds. If a player wants to do a 20-foot jump off of a wall and coup de grace an orc on the ground, as a referee, I would just say, okay, that's a ridiculous request, but you can jump, and if you jump and you don't make a successful acrobatics check on the ground, you're going to take fall damage, and you have to land the attack with a -5 penalty due to the distraction. See, I kind of made it as fair as I could, and I laid out my terms before he did it. I wasn't just going to spring anything on the player. If they want to do something really big, I will grant them the conditions beforehand and let them know, okay, but here's your probability. All right, number 4, you're going to want to single every player out and don't leave anybody out. Everyone at the table, especially if you have a bigger group, should feel like a hero. If you're playing a character, they need to feel like they're actually an individual and not just part of a big troop of adventurers that walk around killing monsters. Every character has a backstory, every character has a personality, and they should get a chance to flaunt it in every session they come to. Some players are going to naturally put themselves in the spotlight over others. They'll be the leader of the group, the high charisma ones who will be the first to speak when the whole group is addressed. Someone will tell the group, what is your business? And one person will step up and start talking. And it's really easy to let this one person run the entire session like they're the main character. You don't want any main characters. Put in situations where you know the more reserved characters will have a chance to use their strengths and stand out, or even have a character specifically talk to this person, maybe someone specifically from their past or relevant to their backstory, so that they're the ones in charge of the decisions with it. If you forget a player and they don't really get to do anything individually on their own the whole adventure, they're probably going to go home feeling pretty crapped out, unless that's the kind of player they are and they don't want the spotlight on them, which some new players might feel that way. 5 is my favorite one. You got to get yourself immersed in your world. You got to get immersed in your world. You're coming around the table and you're setting up your miniatures and your characters and your story, and you're basically all trying to be inside of a fairy tale, a movie, whatever you want to call it. If you're treating it like a bunch of numbers, you are better off playing a board game with the rules all laid out, because D&D is the most open world, free roam, anything can happen adventure game in the entire planet. When you play it right, you feel like Mass Effect times 1000. Therefore, if it's your world, you ought to know every little detail possible, and if somebody asks about a detail that you don't know, you make it up on the spot. They need to know that this is a real world that they can explore to the furthest depths and never find the bottom. Kind of a side tip on the immersion one is that you want to use as many props as possible. I have a lot of respect for anybody who can play with just a whiteboard or no miniatures at all. I can't play that way. I need to use miniatures. The miniatures are the coolest part to me, because if you're all trying to imagine the same thing, you're all going to imagine it very differently. However, the more of it that you can put on the actual table in front of you guys, the more you're all going to imagine the same thing. So miniatures are really cool, and I've gotten more into the environment recently. Now, I'll be honest, I think people with 3D printers are totally abusing people who don't by making them pay like $20 for 4 tiny dungeon walls, things like that. I recommend going to thrift shops and finding little knickknacks that'll make for unique little props and set pieces on top of your table. I found this at the dollar store, and I'm able to use it as a druid grove. It's got little holes in it. You can go inside of it, and I bought like a few of them and made a little druidic grove, and they all looked pretty cool, like weird little pods. And I found this at the Ark for $3. It's just a giant fish bowl waterfall, and you know I'm going to use it at some point for something. I don't even know what yet, but it's coming. The point is, try to make what's in the middle of the table as much like the real thing as possible. Tip number 6, you're going to want to create the illusion of freedom. I'll explain this with a video game. I once played a game called Until Dawn. We bought it as soon as it came out, and I heard from a friend through some stupid rumor that was completely false that the game had like 100 ways to die and 50 different endings. So I thought, whoa, this is like choose your own adventure to the extreme. On my first playthrough, I had the most fun I've ever had in my life with any kind of linear story-based game, because I thought the entire time that every choice I made was taking me down an entirely different path of the story out of like hundreds. And so when I reached the end, I was like, oh great, I got this ending and the house burned down, blah de blah, these people survived. Of course, I was really disappointed to know when my friend tried to play through it that there was only one real ending, and that's awful. But that first playthrough is a good example of the illusion of freedom. I was making choices and I did not know how many different endings there were. So it felt like I was pretty much free roaming in an infinite universe. This is one of the greatest things you can do for your players. Think about it. You're playing Dungeons and Dragons. There is an infinite number of possibilities for what could happen. The way I typically work is I never plan out my sessions until about a couple days before. I'll do a session, I'll mull over what happens next for the week, and then I'll give kind of a loose lead into the next adventure where they arrive at a location. I set them up with some plot devices, a few characters to kind of incite them into some things. But the thing is, the players should always feel like they have the freedom to change the game and go anywhere they want. Like nothing is out of their reach. You guys can play how you want, but I personally loathe campaigns that have the start and the finish completely figured out from the beginning. That means that any choice I make in the first adventure is pretty much going to have to be neglected if it's not what the story wanted. It means that I have to end up at a certain point by the end, and that is a complete waste of the game's potential to me. Along that lines, tip number 7 is you gotta treat D&D like an improv game. And one of the biggest rules of improv is you never say no. If you're doing an improvised scene with somebody, kind of like on Whose Line Is It Anyway, if somebody makes a suggestion, you can never say no to it. If I look out the window and say, there's a zombie apocalypse, you can't be my partner and go look out the window and say, no, there's not, dude. No, you would look out the window, you're like, oh, there's a zombie apocalypse. Well, let me get my frying pan. The oven is burning on fire. And then the other guy would have to be like, oh, you're right, the oven is on fire. This doesn't mean give the players complete control over the game. That's kind of your job. What it does mean is if a player wants to pursue something like a side quest or an idea, something that maybe you weren't expecting as part of the adventure but they became interested in, it's your job to take that and run with it in a direction. Point is, you can't just stop the player right there and say, no, you can't explore that part of my story. It's their world too. You're creating a world that all of you are sharing. So if they want to explore a part of it, it's your job to let them go there. Tip number 8, you gotta make death feel like it's an actual, real, constant threat. Admittedly, this one's pretty much up to you and your players' preferred play style. There are a lot of people that want to go through a whole campaign without ever losing their character. A good thing to do is before the campaign starts, set a tone. Say, this is going to be an easy campaign. You're probably going to survive the entire time. Or say this is going to be a difficult level campaign. You could survive the whole time, but if you make bad decisions or fortune simply doesn't favor you, you could easily die and have to make a new character. You need to set that tone right away because some players might get really offended. And I know I've been really offended when my character died and I wasn't expecting it. I just didn't see it coming and I was really grumpy about it. But right now I'm doing a Game of Thrones style campaign and I basically said at the beginning, you should all expect to end the campaign with different characters than you started with. So far, in 8 sessions, we've had 3 characters die. And I gotta say, it's made the game a lot more interesting. If I were playing an adventure as a player, I'd prefer it to be a really intense, hard concentration, high skill level campaign. That's just me as an experienced player. If I'm an experienced player and I'm playing an easy level campaign, I'm really not going to have fun. I've just been there, done that. I'm ready to try something harder. So if you're playing with a bunch of new players, maybe don't go that route. But if you're playing with more experienced players, this is a great way to spice up the game and make it really just actually rewarding to get through adventures and survive them and go through the story. Tip number 9 is to enjoy yourself and don't bore yourself. I realized after a while of making adventures and campaigns that I was basically setting up encounters where my players would be challenged but not die. And I would essentially be coming in, fighting them, losing, and then moving on with the story. They got to experience a unique, unpredictable experience, but I knew what was going to happen from the moment the adventure began. And I hated it. If you're not having fun, your players are going to be able to tell, and it's also going to rub off on your adventure and your ability to run it. If you're bored, the players will be bored. It's just going to seem like a routine. So what I've started doing is every night we switch up the theme and I do something that I'm going to enjoy. One week I set up a dungeon where the players had to figure out a really complex puzzle in order to defeat one of my monsters, and I was just trying to kill them until they figured it out. I made it a weak monster so as to limit myself and challenge myself, but I didn't have to hold back. I just got to play the game and be a part of it. I was just playing the monsters. Later, I put him in a big boss room, but there was no boss. I turned one of the players' weaknesses against them and they started attacking each other. And at that point, I became a referee with a couple minor things I had to run. But that was interesting for me to watch. It was like watching a play as all the players just started turning on each other and fighting each other. And they had fun too. This is not cruelty. If they're on the edge of their seat, not sure what's going to happen, essentially fighting for their life, they're going to have a lot more fun than just walking through a boring dungeon like every other adventure. There was one adventure I just got drunk and we did all role playing, and I played all these characters that I normally had no energy to play, and they had a blast, every single one of them. It's a hard compromise, I'm going to admit, but you want to be responsible for them having fun, but you're also responsible for yourself having fun. So you gotta do something that might sometimes be risky and you don't necessarily know if it's going to work, but you try it anyway. Number 10, if you're the dungeon master, you are the leader of your group. And you have to be confident and you have to set the tone, and you have to remember that these people are coming over to play the game that you're designing and they want to be there. If they didn't want to be there, they wouldn't come, unless they're just doing it to be polite. Whatever, you just got to ignore them then. I often find it hard to stay out of the crux of wanting to please them and live up to their expectations. This is a really good way to make a really predictable, stupid adventure that you don't have fun doing. Start with doing something that you'll enjoy. Then adapt it so that every player is going to enjoy it as well, whether putting in certain situations for them or making it a more combat focused or role playing focused. The point is, you can't dungeon master with fear. You can't dungeon master while trying to basically make the players like you. You gotta play the game. You're a player sitting around the table just like all the players. So enjoy the game together and make sure that you're enjoying yourself and the players are enjoying yourself. And if everyone's enjoying themselves, then play on. I guess a final little tip is to ask the players what they thought after every session. I've been doing this recently and it's helped me understand what people like and what people don't like. And that information is really valuable. Even if you don't like what you hear, just do it. Okay guys, well thank you for listening. I'm just coming out of my shell a lot as far as D&D stuff and treating myself as an okay viable source. To be honest, I'm a 22-year-old guy. I've run maybe 5 campaigns. I'm running a 6th one right now. I've been playing since middle school. I tried 5th edition and 4th edition. I just like 3.5. I think Pathfinder's cool too, but all these PDFs are online for free, and it's just a good game. So if you have requests, let me know in the comments. If you have disagreements, things you want to debate, I'm probably up for it in the comments. I'm not saying that my word is gospel. I do think that I have found a lot of things that make me more successful than other DMs I have been with in the past. I don't think people take the game far enough. I think it's such an open concept that needs to be as wide open as it can be and as thrilling and challenging as it can be as well. Check out my channel for other Dungeons & Dragons videos, campaigns, sessions, and also competitive laser tag. What? Yeah, check it out right here. This is what it looks like. You should play it. D&D players love this game.